Thank you very much for the invitation, Adrian. I'm calling in from home in Brussels.
Fantastic. So right at the center of CRCF Days last week. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happened during the days, your perspective on it. So I'm super excited, and because I wasn't there in the beginning, I said also for me this will be a little bit of a news update. Maybe can you let us know a little bit, like how did you even get into carbon markets, into policy in that space, and then maybe in the end also what EU CRCF actually stands for and what it is?
Sure. Yeah, I'm an old hand here in European policy terms. I've been living in Brussels for some 25 years. I've had roles in consultancy in the US government, and then for 13 years in a series of tech companies. And then 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, decided that it was time for a change in career, and looked for something that I would be even more motivated by and find even more meaningful, and found this very interesting job at the Negative Emissions Platform, which is an industry association for the permanent carbon removals sector, based in Brussels. Global industry association focused mainly on European policy, because that's where we think the biggest difference can be made for every hour of effort. And so that's what we're doing.
And what is EU CRCF actually?
So the CRCF is the Carbon Removal and Carbon Farming Certification Framework. It's an EU regulation which was adopted by the legislators, I think, last year, and has been put into essentially put into force by the European Commission through the adoption of 3 methodologies for BECCS, DACS, and biochar. And those are now in effect. So it is already possible to start the process of getting European certification for projects in those 3 areas.
And what does it actually mean to get the certification, right? Because we know things like Vera, Gold Standard, Isometric, Puro, and so on. But what does it mean actually to be certified under CRCF?
Yeah, well, the objective of the CRCF is very clearly to support the voluntary market. So that's what it's designed for. It's about providing a political and regulatory signal to the market that the European Union is serious about carbon removals. It may not have regulated them into compliance markets yet, but it intends to do so. And in the meantime, you are free to use this highly credible European Union stamp of approval to support your activities on the voluntary market. So that's where it is right now, and I think it's been so far very successful at doing that. It is true that there are still pieces of it to be put into place between now and 2028, but it's already possible to start using it, and a number of projects have already applied for the certification.
I certainly get a lot of anticipation from corporates in Europe for it. I think I just talked to a company last week. Obviously, they were looking at it a little bit from the Green Claims Directive. They were like, we were hoping that the Green Claims Directive at a certain point comes, and maybe we were able to make claims based on CRCF certified credits. Obviously, now the Green Claims Directive is a little bit on ice, but still, I think the same kind of meaning and direction that they're looking at is, hey, if I want to make claims or just in general contribute to climate protection projects, this will help me quite a bit. Is that like the sense of the CRCF?
Yes, I think it was the CRCF was not designed with a claims framework in mind. In fact, it was explicitly excluding matter of claims because at the time, the European Commission pointed to the Green Claims Directive as the place where the question of use cases and claims would be addressed. And in the event, as you know, the Green Claims Directive was frozen, and therefore one of the key messages that the European Commission received during the CRCF Day last week from almost everybody present was, you need to do something about these use cases and these claims because the Green Claims Directive is not coming, and therefore it is still dangerous for some corporates, at least they feel it is, to buy carbon removals and make claims on the market. And we need you, the European Commission, to provide some kind of reassurance. So I think that they said that they had heard and acknowledged the message, and hopefully they'll be doing something about that in the next few months.
Okay, now I understand. So basically you have the framework to say what kind of credit has high integrity in Europe, but now that's all great, but still we don't know how to use it if we make a claim as a company because there's no framework for that. And this is not what the CRCF is actually doing. It's more like telling the integrity thing about the project.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Now you already started with the CRCF days. What happened? Like, what do you think was like top of mind? Any kind of interesting insights or just in general observations?
Yeah, so I think in general, so I would say it's a slight misnomer. I think it's more of a CDR day than a CRCF day because it covered a lot more than just the CRCF. It covered a whole series of things at the European.
But they called it CRCF days, right?
Yes.
Okay.
They did. I don't know why. I don't know why they used that.
I was wondering if that maybe just was the LinkedIn name because it was all over LinkedIn, or if that was the real name.
No, that was the official name, but I think it's a misnomer because it really covered far more than the CRCF. And what it did was provide a very useful overview of all of the things that the European Commission is doing today on carbon dioxide removals. And this is, world leading, absolutely, particularly in the absence of leadership from the United States under the current administration. And the fact that other jurisdictions in the world are some way behind, the European Union is still the place where the action is in terms of creating the regulatory frameworks and the structures that are needed for CDR to scale in the long term. And when you look at the proposals that will be coming this summer on the ETS and also on member state targets towards the end of the year, these are things that could really completely transform the landscape. So in general, that progress was something that the European Commission was able to showcase during the CRCF day or days. And however, I think that there are still a lot of key questions. And these were things that were raised during the CRCF days. We mentioned claims and use cases. Another one would be the portfolio approach. The European Commission talks a lot about the need to make sure that all permanent CDR technologies are supported for all the reasons that we could go into if you wish, but which are well understood by the market. But we don't see that backed up with action. We see talk about BECCS and DACS and biochar and methodologies for the CRCF, and we see talk about the inclusion of BECCS and DACS credits in the ETS, and we don't hear anything about ocean alkalinity enhancement or direct ocean capture or biomass sequestration or enhanced rock weathering or any of the other pathways and also unique.
But is that because BECCS and DACS just maybe have a better lobby, or what do you think are the main reasons?
I think that the main reason is that the officials in the European Commission regard the existence of the CCS directive, which regulates BECCS and DACS to some extent, as a kind of as making those things a kind of low-hanging fruit because they're easier to grapple with, rather than creating new frameworks for technologies which, frankly, the officials are less familiar with and don't have quite the same regulatory underpinning. I think that's the main reason, but it's sometimes difficult to get clear answers. So apart from the portfolio approach, there are also some questions about what they've called the purchasing facility, which initially seemed to be something which was going to be available to all types of carbon dioxide removals, but now seems to be something which they are applying only for the temporary carbon removals. Also, a number of questions about the Buyers Club, which is a very exciting tool which the Commission has announced, and some details were presented during the CRCF days, but then there are still questions about, for example, how projects can get into the pipeline and how buyers can be brought in to the Buyers Club, etc. So we're looking forward to those things being.
And I also think from the outside, at least, this Buyers Club was one of the bigger topics, right? Like, how is this supposed to work? Because I'm very curious. Why I'm curious is, like, obviously we are also working with a lot of corporates and big corporates, and they've never heard about that. So I'm just curious, like, what entails the Buyers Club and how is it supposed to work?
Well, I think the top experts on the Buyers Club, which I recommend you invite to your next session, would be our friends at Carbon Gap, and in particular Alexander Mekele.
I actually have him for the next episode.
You do? Perfect.
Yeah,
So
yeah, no, he's coming.
those questions as well. He's kind of in the lead on that. I think the answer is that the Buyers Club is being worked on as a project which has a very short-term goal, which is to support the emergence of a class of buyers that are willing to start buying carbon dioxide removals quickly. And in order to make that happen, the view of the team has been that you need to focus on a number of buyers and on a number of projects that are ready to go quickly or likely to be ready to go quickly. And that the extension of the Buyers Club to a much larger group of buyers and corporates that you referenced, and to projects that can go into a pipeline, is something that needs to come in due course, but that they really want to get some low-hanging fruit and some quick wins this year, which is not a negligible piece of work to do. So, but again, Alex can give you more detail on that.
Yeah, fantastic. So I have the perfect lineup. That sounds great. I'm still wondering. Like, I think this year a lot needs to happen, right? You just mentioned that before. There's still a lot of things that need to work out and so on. Like, how do you see the overall chance of, like, getting all these things done this year? It feels for me it's a lot, right? With EU ETS and more coming up. Like, how do you see the chances that we actually have, like, more clarity on these topics after this year?
Well, I think that there are some things which are clearly short-term in nature, and the Buyers Club at least has a short-term element to it. So there is a plan to have results by the end of the year. I think if you're looking for results by the end of the year, don't think about ETS, because that's a classic European Union legislative procedure. Those typically last 18 months. And so if you assume that it starts in July this year, you're looking really at the end of 2027 before that is adopted and law.
All right, yeah.
A number of months, perhaps a year or even two, for that to come into force. So those things and member state targets, those are things which are likely to take much more time.
Okay, well, that's good from the timeline perspective. Now, if we, like, a lot of the listeners are actually corporates and buyers, like, if you, from their perspective, look at the current status of CRCF days and obviously what happened, like, what should they take away in a nutshell from it? Like, what is the impact at the moment for them?
I think the takeaway is that the European Union is still where the action is, and that that there's a strong need to engage in the process. So participate in the legislative process around ETS, participate in the policy-making process, which is a little bit further in the future for member state targets. Start talking to your national governments as well if you're a European corporate. But there is, the potential through these two types of instrument. There is the potential for an absolutely quantum leap to start in Europe in terms of building compliance markets for carbon dioxide removal. So I think the message is there's real progress and more is coming, and 2026 is the start of something really super exciting. Of course, it's also high risk, because if the European Union proposes legislation which pushes carbon dioxide removals far forward, and then for political reasons that falls flat, or is massively watered down or whatever, then I think it could be a real problem for the market. The confidence takes a hit.
So really deciding months and 1.5 years coming up, because it also for projects, right? Based on that, probably a lot of projects can create a business model, create a business plan, get funding. So exciting months ahead. Chris, thanks so much for joining CWN and for the insights of CRCF Days. And I will get more insights on the Buyers Club from Alexander in the next episode. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm pleased to be able to contribute to your listeners. And of course, they can reach out if they're interested in getting involved with our work